three of my favorite people on this planet and a trifecta of APBA Hall of Famers. We're just talking about the lifelong friendships that this one single little interest can produce or cement. You know, we're coming up on the annual APBA convention, that great get together a couple of weeks from now in Alpharetta, Georgia, the not so new headquarters. It's been 10 years since the last kind of semi-official tournament in Lancaster before the company was moved down to Georgia. And with us today, Pete Simonelli, Hall of Fame 2005, John Cochrane, Hall of Fame 2009, Rebecca Peterson, Hall of Fame 2021, correct?
The plaque says 20. She and John Asselon were supposed to go in 20, and then Steve Ryan in 21 as a one-man class, but that all got celebrated and handed out at the same time for what we will politely call exigent circumstances.
No, I mean, certainly, and during this this pandemic, board games have really come to the fore, even more so than they had been. We're also talking about technology, and these days, you know, you get Instagram, you get a ton of board gamers. In fact, in the UK, they just had some sort of expo where they got a bunch of folks together. I wonder if decades from now, these folks will have the kind of enduring relationships that you folks have had. I mean, do you even remember? I mean, how long have you guys, you know, Pete, John, when did you meet? You know, John, Rebecca, obviously. I mean, how long is this? I mean, we've got like almost 200 years, mine included, I guess, of APBA experience here. And it's amazing.
Yeah. I know when I first crossed paths with Pete, and that was at the 76 convention in Philly, because he ran that tournament. Now he probably doesn't remember me at that tournament from the next 200 people that were in it. But that's when I first crossed paths with him, and with Bob Henry, and with Roy. Who else of the old guard that's still floating around?
How about Skeet?
Did Skeet and Farrell make appearances at that convention? I don't recall if they did.
Skeet usually did.
In 76?
Didn't always.
Yeah.
But then you had people like Ben Weiser. Did you meet? I guess.
Right.
Oh yeah, of course I met Ben, who was very.
I don't know if the Gatos brothers were at that one. I know they were at
I don't recall it. Ron Gold, who has turned up since. He turned up at one of the late Lancaster conventions. Norm Pascal, who was still floating around that place. That's where I go back. And of course, compared to you, Pete, I'm a piker. I mean, I was, 1976 it was late to the game for you.
That was already the third convention.
Yeah, I was quite literally still in high school.
Another name from back at that convention is Mark Jacobson.
To this day, that'll live far from me to this day. The primary on paper difference between Mark and I is about 100 points of IQ. Mark was only child of older parents, both government workers, and born and brought home to North Arlington 2 years after I was born and brought home to McLean. So a lot of common experience, and I was in the league with Mark for many years, and he's still floating around. Last I had eyes on him was at the last game at RFK in 2007 before they moved to Nats Park. So, but he's still floating around. Went on to have a great career at NSA. Mark's probably the first of the inside the Beltway crowd in the APBA community, because Mark was 2 years younger than me, but 2 years ahead of me in school because he skipped high school. So that's quite literally. So IQ, unmeasurable IQ, and the people at WNL High School, which is right down the street from me here, called his parents in his freshman year of high school and said, he's wasting his time here. If we pay for it, can we just send him to GWU? Great guy. He's the guy that Conrad Horn wrote in the journal and said, the kid's so smart that we all run off to the bar because he can't follow us.
Yeah, right.
I think that was the 75 convention. And Mark would have only been 16 then. So 46 years ago, Pete. Good God.
Yeah, well, there were
46 years ago this weekend. Ben Franklin Hotel?
Yes, the first one was Bellevue Stratford, and the third one, the Ben Franklin.
Right.
And, there are people that are still around today that we don't normally see, like Rich Prey, for example, always came to those conventions. I'm sure I still have a directory of the names of the attendees in my files. But again, some people have moved on, and then some we just don't see anymore, but they're never forgotten.
I'm looking at the old APBA journal here, June 15th to 17th. 1973, the first tournament, right, in Philadelphia.
Yes.
So it is kind of a
yeah. And then the next 75 and 76 were similarly timed. Yeah.
wow. Wow.
Was, I remember one so bad to go in 73, but you know, I was 16 years old, and that was a bit of a stretch to do by myself.
Also, speaking of tournaments now, also in its, this will be minus an interruption, the 8th year of your Bridesburg. Speaking of Philadelphia area, Boys and Girls Club.
Well, it ties in. It would be the 10th year, as you say. It ties exactly into when the conventions moved to Alpharetta. It would be the 10th, but we lost a couple to, once again, exigent circumstances. The 2020, we never even got the wheels screwed on the cart for that one. May of last year, we were getting ready to do it. And the Philadelphia Boys and Girls Club that oversees all 7 Philadelphia clubs, including Bridesburg, came down and said, no, field trips are prohibited for this summer. So that went in the tank. We had a tournament for the for the adults and their own children in one case instead. But we just on Monday got the word that the suits are not going to stand in our way this year. And so, you know, barring famine, flood, or further pestilence, we're on for August 6th. And you want to talk about pent up demand. I mean, Brian Kavanaugh at the Boys Club will have 3 classes worth of new kids that have not been to one of these. Wow. Okay. But on my end, a lot of years, you get 12, 13, 14 adults to show up. And a lot of years by convention time, I've got 9 or 10, and I spend the entire convention wandering around Alpharetta on my knees, begging people to come to the darn thing, because you got to have a certain number of adults or it doesn't work. I already have 16 adults signed up for this year, including 3 who've never gone.
All right.
I am, and I am like, oh boy, I better be, you know, I'm not proselytizing now, because I'm gonna, you know, we get more than there's usually some late signups. I can only take so many. I'm gonna run out of places to sit them. And boy, oh boy, is that the problem I wish I had in here. So, and the fact that there's 3 new people, all people I know, of course, we don't let people wander in off the street for this because of the presence of the kids. But there are people I know, a couple, you know, one of them, somebody I've been trying to get to come for years, and a couple of people that I've met just in the last year, but are good at the people that I've played with and socialized with. One of the kids that was that was there as a junior high school kid, at the first time that those kids showed up at the 2011 Lancaster convention, all the way through college, all the way through grad school, emailed me this year and said, don't put me in with the kids this year. He says, I am an adult. I have a full-time job. I'm coming as an adult, and I'm making a contribution. Wow. Awesome. And I'm like, oh my God. We were all a lot younger once. I remember, you know, I remember him as a 12-year-old kid. I should point out that without Rebecca and Pete and Randy Corrier and Brian Kavanaugh and rest his soul, I still tear up Dusty Welsh. You know, I'm essentially just the face of this thing. They're the ones that have done all the work and made it happen. As Rebecca correctly pointed out to me the other day, if it weren't for her, we'd be having this tournament out next to a dumpster at a Walmart. So that's
speaking of how Rebecca keeps things together. I first met, interject my little story here quickly. I first met Pete right up here in North Jersey in 2011, and every time I talk about anything having to do with the Apple Football Club is directly related to this gentleman. Without him, I wouldn't be doing anything like this. It'd be, you know, I wouldn't have known anything. So I then took the chance and went out to the Lancaster 2012, and that's where I met Rebecca and John. And Rebecca was still at the time, you were the pinch player, and you had been doing that for a while, and you've risen through the ranks here.
Yeah, so John and I moved in together in 1996, and the first time he took me to anything, because there weren't any conventions going on at the time, the first time he took me to anything APBA related, there was a card show in Richmond, I want to say.
Richmond International.
2000?
2000 is correct.
Right.
When Bordegon
And
was running things, he was going.
It was around the 50th anniversary of the game, and I met Skeet and Barrel, and it's not. John had introduced me to the game casually. We'd played a game or two, but yeah, it wasn't until the extra conventions that weren't like game company conventions up in the Lancaster area that I really kind of saw other people other than John and Skeet and Barrel. But then what had happened was there was this whole set of cards that John had acquired as part of working on the handbook. And so I would come along and I would hand out cards free to a good home while everybody was participating in the tournament. That was kind of the first thing that I did. Was I was in charge of extra cards and just making sure that they got a good home.
Primarily, those were duplicate great teams of the old sets of the great teams in the past.
And yeah, I served as the pinch player. So it was always this thing that would happen at night. Everybody would say, okay, the tournament's all set. We have the right number of players. And then the next morning, somebody would show up that hadn't registered. And the problem was, do you tell that person, sorry? No. But I always agreed to serve as the pinch player. And so sometimes at night, I'd go to bed thinking, oh, I'm going to play tomorrow. And the next morning, somebody would show up and I wasn't needed. And it was like, oh, you're out. Or I'd go to bed the night before thinking, oh, I'm not going to be needed. And the next morning, maybe I would have to pinch play. And then, yeah, it actually happened once that I had to pinch play. And yeah, now John's that pinch player.
What actually happened there was that just to fill in the chronology, Rebecca was first called upon as pinch player in 2008 convention in Vegas. And we had all gone to bed Friday night, and I got a call in my room at about 11 o'clock at night from Skeet. And I don't know why this had never come up in prior years or what they did about it. But he called me and says, John, we got a problem. We got an odd number of people. That's a problem. Understand that. And he said, do you have an extra team? And can Rebecca play to even out the draw? Of course, I always had an extra team. I never travel without a ugly collection of APBA cards. And so fine. But then we got down there in the morning and somebody had showed up. Go to Lancaster, 2009, 10, 11, 12. Completely, we're all statistics freaks. It should be a 50-50 shot. She never actually wound up having to sit and play. We get down to the first Alpharetta convention, 13. And darn if she doesn't have to, put on her helmet and get in the box. But darn if she doesn't make a splash in the division. She winds up going 4 and 6 in the division, which for somebody who doesn't actually play otherwise. But she
Sorry, I was off camera for a second because I needed to get.
Yeah. This is
nice.
Yeah, she her first game, was it Gilles Thibault you got in the first game? Yeah, Gilles Thibault. You walked him off in the first game, and he walks over to where I'm playing, and he said, oh God, you should have seen the look in her eyes when she won that walk-off. We created a monster. She ends up going 4 and 6 in a division that not only included Gilles, but people like Roy Langens, and created such a fuss that, much like exactly analogous to Jackie Robinson, who won the first Rookie of the Year because they essentially created it to give it to him. She won the first Rookie of the Year because the person created it. And he also told me in his own inimitable style at the end of that tournament, he says, from now on, she has to play you can sit if we need to, which I have done on a couple of occasions now.
So that was the 2013 tournament.
That was 2013. So she's been playing ever since. And I've sat out at least 2, maybe 3 since because somebody has to be the pinch player and it can't be her anymore. But
and you know what? It's a little interesting to me that it was 2013. Now I'm looking at the trophy. To me, it just seems like it's been a couple of tournaments.
Yeah, it had to be 13 because you got the trophy the next year, and it could not have wired into 15 because you weren't there in 15.
Right.
That was one of the 3 that you've missed.
Yeah.
So because 2015 was the year that her father died 24 hours after Darrell Lincoln died.
Right.
So I was in Alpharetta, but she was in Arkansas. So we had to divide and conquer with the 2 deaths that close. So that's that was it. And I got told at the end of that convention, even though she had a valid excuse, at least 5 people told me not to come back the next year if I didn't bring her. So shows what my Hall of Fame status.
For those who maybe come across this and who are not necessarily APBA folk, we're talking about Vera Lincoln and Skeet Carr, the kind of the 2 original employees, along with the founder Dick Seitz in Lancaster. In terms of the handbook, this is the Ed Zach Handbook. This is the 2nd edition, one of the greatest achievements in any board games history for sure. It details cards, and it's now, of course, available online. It tells you about all the various permutations and season sets. Talking about the cards and talking about playing, I mean, a lot of times you'll hear about APBA Ball and kind of what you have to do head to head. I mean, do you have any, I guess 2 parts. I mean, who's kind of the better player, or, you know, do you even keep track of that kind of a thing? And do you have any kind of personal tips for kind of playing head to head, say in a tournament setting?
Pete, I think Rebecca ought to answer this. She's had the most tournament success. Sure as heck you and I have not.
Well, that's unfortunate because I have no tips. I take a team, I play, I go home. I'm just there to have fun.
In terms of who are the best,
I win and how many games I lose, and I don't care if I go to the playoffs or not. Actually, if I go to the playoffs, then I miss out on things like dinner and stuff like that. So it's, you know.
She made the playoffs in 2019, the same year that another female member of the crowd, Amy Whites, won the division I was in and ran the table. And I can't say that Rebecca broke ground for women being in the tournament, because Lynn Siemens was floating around for years.
Lynn's been a player for years and years and years.
But nonetheless, but to say that Rebecca has moved the envelope is certainly not wrong. Pete, good players. Well, let's start with the multiple people who have won the convention tournament multiple times. There's 3 of those: John Duke, Brian Wells, Steve Scott. Steve just got his 3rd. The only 3-time winner. He's also the only back-to-back winner. Those guys know what they're doing. Pete, who else do you think is somebody you don't want to face if you're trying to win that tournament?
Well, not to brag, but I have beaten Brian Wells a couple of times, although he's got the edge over me, and certainly in winning tournaments. I can't think of anybody. It's you're right, that they kind of know what they're doing. They pick the right team, probably the right lineup, but it's difficult to win a tournament like that. And anything can happen in a short series, which is basically what it is. But in my mind, what it comes down to is you have to get the rolls. And Roy said that as much when he won. He just got the right rolls at the right time.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun. You do have to play a little APBA ball. At home, I play the master game. So when I go to these the convention or any other tournaments where it's basic game, I've got to get back into that. And you know, APBA ball wise, for example, I have to remember, don't put one of my good players batting in front of the guy with the 41. I heard he in Vegas, I guess, last year, that hurt me. Little things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's part of it.
When you guys say APBA ball, I think you're talking about, see, this is because I'm not as familiar. I think you guys are talking about the same thing that Brian Wells said to me one time. He's like, yeah, you can't think about real baseball. You have to look at the cards and look at the way that the statistics are laid out on the cards and choose your team based on what the card says, not real baseball.
And what the specific rules of the tournament are, and there are
That's
different.
True.
Pete, you're talking about putting your good player in front of the guy with the 41. Doesn't matter in Alpharetta. We ignore injuries in Alpharetta. Yeah. But they don't in Vegas, and so there you go. The one thing if you want one tip for people to take home, if you're using a pre-analytics, pre-Bill James team,
you're at a disadvantage.
Well, no, not necessarily. If you're using the old cards, you are. For years, I was bringing the old 50s cards to tournaments so people could see them. But the way those cards are constructed, they're at a disadvantage against modern cards. A lot of the pitchers are downgraded. Part-time hitters are downgraded. No Z's on the pitchers. That just destroys you. But here's and this is more about baseball than APBA. This is not really playing APBA ball. This is playing baseball. Been playing with some 40s teams lately. Been playing online with Steve Stoppel, David Small. And the thing that I notice on those 40 teams is that very often the Hall of Fame number 3 hitter ought to be your leadoff guy. Not necessarily a power hitter, usually a fantastic on-base percentage. Found this out both in 1941, both with the Cardinals, Stan Musial, and the Yankees with Joe DiMaggio. This is not a function of APBA ball. This is a function of that starting with Casey Stengel and Earl Weaver, but being moved very much forward by Bill James and his crowd. We figured out that on-base percentage, which remember when we were kids, they didn't even publish it in the paper. And I can remember when they started to, and somebody writing into the Sporting News and saying that there ought to be a constitutional amendment prohibiting it. But baseball fans can be very stuck in this stuff. But yeah, look and see if you don't have a number 3 hitter that wouldn't do you a lot better if you got him an extra at bat and got him to at least lead off the first inning. There's one tip. Don't go by the lineup that was used at the time. The managers weren't always as enlightened on analytics as they are now. And let's face it, if APBA was about analytics before the word analytics was in the game.
For sure. For those, again, if you're not an APBA person, Brian Wells is the son of Greg Wells. Greg Wells worked at the APBA Journal with the great Howard Alskog, who saved the APBA Journal in the 80s. Alskog is a football god. I mean, he's kind of the god of football, ultimately, of the football game. And Brian, his son, they both were inducted in the Hall of Fame in 2013, which was super cool. Cool. And speaking and tying back to Bridesburg and how Brian was a young man, and now he's an older young man, but he's still, building through the ranks. And actually,
Brian will always be 9 years older than most of us, although he is grown up to be a very fine and responsible and good young adult. But he'll always be that 9-year-old kid that we can't beat.
For sure.
Because that's how old he was when he first won the tournament.
Actually, talking about the 50s sets versus today's sets, and certainly in the APBA football world, there's, clearly there are eras, again, as the handbook points out, the various eras, and there are kind of philosophies behind the cards, and there are always that kind of mystery of kind of who calculated what set, and a lot of that is word of mouth lore, a lot's in the APBA journals. I just wonder if you could maybe break down some of the many eras, just at least on the baseball side, and if you still get enjoyment from the older cards, even though they may not be as finely tuned as what you're getting right now.
Pete, you want this one?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Eras, just, and again, realizing that you're intending on showing this to people who might not have spent the last, I figured out, 54 years. It's just about 54 years ago this week that I first got the game. Well, something's been standard in my life all this time. The eras, real quickly, 1950 through 1955, the original cards. The problem with playing those is they're very valuable as collector's items. The original 1950 set, there may be a dozen sets still floating around. There were only 130 some ever printed. But those cards have great historical value, and they're fun to play against each other. But you got to realize, no speed ratings, no control or strikeout ratings. There is no incentive to ever use a pinch runner on those sets, because everybody runs this unless they've got unless they've got an 11 and you're going to hit and run, because there's no speed difference. Carl Furillo and Jackie Robinson are the same speed from 1950 through 1955, which is of course wrong. Control ratings and the speed ratings came in with 56. Those are a lot more. A lot of people say 58 was the big change when double columns came in. But the speed ratings and the control ratings in 56 were at least as important.
6 cards there, or 58.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. There's my stuff.
to back up just with the earlier cards, 50 to 55, you were commenting correctly. And in addition, it's hard to make them accurate without the double columns, for one thing. And there were things that, like the hit by pitch, was difficult to implement in those sets. They used eventually Dick used the 15s and 19s, and then it evolved to the 22. But yes, that's how it was. And as you said, it's fun to play them against each other, but it's a little different if you try to play them against a modern team.
Yeah. Yeah, I used for years. I brought those cards to the convention because I thought people would want to see them, but I got tired of I just got tired of not being competitive, and it wasn't, So I'm bringing more modern stuff now. But yeah, in the early set, there were three other change. You mentioned the hit by pitch, the 42s, of course, the Ron Hunt card that required 7 22s because he was always diving in front of pitches, and they finally came up with the 42 to make that card a little less ridiculous. The difference being that 42 actually gives you the hit by pitch on bases empty, which nothing else does. The introduction in the early 70s, I forget the exact date, of common usage of second column singles. Double columns helped sort out how many home runs, doubles, and triples, but it didn't do a darn thing for extra base hits versus singles because the second column was still all extra base hits until the early 70s. The allowing basic game, allowing a stolen base to come directly off a walk, not a single, i.e. using the 14 star rather than just the 10 or 11, was the year that they had to give Lou, came after the year they had to give Lou Brock a card that hit 320 when he only hit 280 or something like that. I'm not exactly right, but to get enough stolen bases, they had to put so many 11s on his card that it hit too hard. So they finally came up with the 14 asterisk, which gives you the stolen base without giving you the extra base hit, without giving you the base hit. Those are all very, very large changes. Also, sometime in the 70s, the J factor to give longer injuries to guys who were hurt more and shorter injuries to guys who were hurt less, rather than just the random thing that was on the boards. All of these things come in. But another very large change. Look, and the classic, this is 1953 Ted Williams, who came back late from the Korean War and tore up the league for 2 months. Didn't qualify for the batting title. That card absolutely correctly would have 4 1s on it. Okay. But they didn't do that. They reduced part-time players in those days. Same with 1957 Bob Hazel, 1955 Bob Hale, there's a few others. Getting away from that, going ahead and giving people the cards they deserve and just trusting the players not to overuse them. Same with the pitching. This is near and dear to my heart because this is my first set. 1967 Tommy John with an ERA well below 250, but only 190 some innings pitched. That was a B then, because if you didn't have 200 innings pitched, you lost a grade. Which now part of that also was because there were two of the other A pitchers in the set were on the same team. That was the St. Louis Wonder White Sox. But still, that sort of nonsense, the cards now, if you're willing to do your own limitations based on usage, the cards now are a lot more accurate, even without the innovations, just because they're not penalizing the part-time players the way they. And back in the 50s, it was murder. It was absolute murder what they did to the part-time players. So that's another big piece.
Pete, I remember when you were selling Robert Henry's collection. Robert Henry, of course, the longtime Q&A columnist for the APBA Journal, and we'll get to that hopefully a bit later here. But you had some Strato sets. I'm just kind of curious if you wish to comment about how APBA cards have, through the years, and the game in its totality, in its entire history, have compared to some of the competitors out there. No one's knocking any games. I mean, you want to play them all, really. I mean, APBA is just the one, certainly, that, maintains a hold on us. Have there been any other cards or sets, games that kind of, have, maybe answer some of the mechanics issues that APBA may or may not have, and just your general thoughts about, you know, the broad landscape of all these sports simulation games.
Yeah, you mentioned some of these other games, and if you go way back, there was one called Big League Manager and Nagamco, and I've even forgotten how a lot of these work. You know, I've tinkered with them a little bit, but I think it comes down to the individual player's preference. What are they comfortable with, and what do they enjoy at most? I do know several people who are, you could call them APBA fanatics, or even friends of mine, who are also into the Stratomatic. Okay, they do both. Robert Henry was like that, and for one, and I was amazed that he could be such an analyst, a good analyst of the APBA cards as well as the Stratomatic, you know, which was that's a lot to chew on. Right? But yeah, and he collected a lot of that stuff, and you know, he was into that. And I know one of the things that people who prefer Stratomatic say, as opposed to APBA, is that they don't like to have to read a result. They want to get it right off the card. They don't want to get a number and then have to go to boards, and you know, they can't cope with that. Okay, that's fine. You know, whatever suits you. Everybody's different. And in my case, you know, I got into APBA in 1957, very early on. There was no Stratomatic then. I think the only thing around maybe was All-Star Baseball with the spinner. But I saw that APBA was much better, and I gravitated to that, adopted it, been with it ever since.
That's amazing. I mean, APBA was really way ahead of the time. And talking about 1957, that's also the first APBA football season set. You know, the season replicated came out
the following year. Yes,
right.
57 season came out in 58, right?
As the 59 edition. It's like, wow. And that's a year before the big game. I was just talking to John Asselon actually about it. It's like how prescient, you know. Of course, you know, you can't mention APBA without the National Pastime Game. And of course, Pete, you're a custodian of one of the last surviving original copies. You still have that.
Yes, not the complete. Cliff Van Beek's daughter Carol had given me the cards that he had. What I have is a complete American League and the National League, but less 34 cards and no complete teams. And I was really, you know, flabbergasted and honored when she gave those to me. But I told her, look, I'll just hold on to them, but after me, they're going back to your family, and they will go to her daughter at some point.
Yeah, for sure. And when Dick Seitz took that set and kind of added the tweaks, what were exactly the tweaks that he added to get the game off the ground?
He had the pitching grades, of course, and fielding, and then later on came the speed ratings and XYZ and so forth, and little by little, as John was pointing out a few minutes ago. You know, it slowly evolved to double columns, and that's the beauty of the APBA game, which again is based on National Pastime. That there's a lot of flexibility there. You can really do anything you want with it, make changes, do your own thing, which is what I do. I know a lot of people would never dare change anything, even if it was a blatant mistake. Which, you know, you do get these errors sometimes with all. So many different numbers and calculations, particularly, you know, when Dick was doing it in the old days. You know, I don't fault him for that. I make mistakes myself in my fine tuning. But that's what, you know, put APBA on the map. You know, Dick added these different things, and this is where we are today.
You know, and John, Rebecca, you speaking about those very early cards. What is your collection like these days? I mean,
for all intents and purposes, complete.
Wow.
Now I say for all intents and purposes, first and foremost, every time I think we know everything there is to know about the old cards, I learn something new. Because there is Dick Seitz kept absolutely no record of when he changed things or anything like that. That's why there's had to be so much research, not just the cards. The work that Dusty Welsh did on the boards, and which now just within the last week, I've had somebody I don't even know come forward and say that that they've got some information to update and improve that, and I don't doubt that they do. And my response to that, of course, is bring it on. There's not one piece of data in that handbook that anybody has any ego about. We don't want it. This is not, we don't want it to be something somebody wants. We want it to be correct. I'm pretty well complete. There's an error card here that got corrected that I might not have, and a version of one of the old great teams of the past. You have to go, the handbook you held up, the Zach Handbook you held up, said right in it, even though it had a lot, yes, the blue book. The blue book, which
beautiful,
which for APBA fans is the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, and all wrapped into one. But the fact of the matter is, for all the work Ed did on that, and there's massive work in there on the variations of the old great teams of the past, he wrote right in there, he says, I don't think I've got half of it. And he was right. If you want to see where that went, go to the online handbook and see the work that was done by Don Adams primarily, and some by me, in terms of backing that out. I think the 1931, the old version, I'm not talking about the newer ones that were when they started completely redoing them, 15 years ago, but the old version great teams of the past that were sold singly in the long envelopes, the 1931 A's, which is one of the first two that was put out, there are at least 10, if not 11 identifiable variations of that set. And Dick Seitz left records of ungots, nothing. I mean, that was just it. Ed and Dan Armstrong and Don Adams and I pieced that together. Rebecca was talking earlier about those big tubs of cards she was giving away at the conventions. That was the result of me going on eBay and somebody that didn't know what they had saying, here's 60 old great teams of the past, and I win it for $10. And 58 of the 60 are something that I've already got 10 copies of, but 2 are something I needed for the research. I don't know how many versions of the 1953 Yankees and Dodgers D format we gave away over those years, but it took, how many conventions did it take before we finally got rid of? I actually probably still have a dozen sets downstairs.
Actually, until the Boys Club came along, I was still giving those card sets
That's
out.
right. Until we started doing
Boys Club came
the Henry
along, and I was like, oh, here's all these cards.
Now, speaking of things, I want to back up to also speaking of things other people have done, and this was done with the game company's permission. The Negro League cards that our dear departed friend Charlie Fauché concocted and was selling and donating the proceeds to the Negro League Players Charity. And that now I think a man named Rob Weibel has taken that over since we lost Charlie far too early. Those cards are just fascinating, and you should have seen the Bridesburg kids when I brought a box of one of each of them, and Charlie had dozens and dozens of these things he put together, and a box with one of each of what he had that I brought to the Henry tournament. I guess it was in 2018, and you should have seen those kids. And one or two of those kids established, online relationships with Charlie to talk about this, because of course, you're talking about a 10, 12-year-old kid. Black people weren't allowed to play, until somebody tells them, what do they know? I was born in 1957, and I didn't really know it until I started reading that. It all had been buried by the time I was watching the game. That's a very interesting thing. And even though that's APBA cards somebody else made, that was done with the company and John Herson's blessing. So, that's something we can, with clear conscience, tell people to look up. It really, really outrageously interesting stuff. And then you get the Josh Gibson card with 4 1s on it. In Josh Gibson's case, that's probably right. So that's something I'll throw a plug in for that.
For sure.
But Jeff, you were asking about John's collection though, and
right.
when I moved in with him, his collection wasn't anywhere near what it is now. And this kind of goes along the lines of innovations that have happened. And so this was an innovation in collecting. I remember when I first moved in with him, and he did express this interest of trying to fill out his collection. And those were the days when there were these like advertisements, I guess, in the APBA Journal. And
that was the market.
I met with him and some of these guys, you know, where, yeah, you sent in a bid by US mail. I mean, who knows anything about that? Which then turned into eBay, which has been just a complete boon for people who are trying to collect and people who are trying to fill out collections. And that really made John being able to fill out his collection so much easier than it had been when it was just somebody putting an ad in the journal and then having to mail in your requests and then maybe meet up together or maybe send them by mail.
And the thing is, what inspired me to get what I didn't have, which wasn't that much. Or I didn't think so, but that's before we saw all the variations on the great teams in the past. But in terms of the season sets, all I was missing was the first 12. Okay. All I was missing was original 50 to 61. Wasn't really thinking about doing much about that till that bloody handbook came out.
Yep.
And it wasn't just all the data in there. It was Ed Zach's ability to take his enthusiasm for it and make it bleed through ink and paper. I thought, gee whiz, I wonder how many of those 12 sets I can get. Well, it wasn't too long after that eBay descended on us. And it wasn't too long after that, you know, maybe a decade that I had them. And it was, and you know, about half of them came from eBay, about half came from old APBA Journal ads. But what one came from a reference in that handbook where Ed, you know, I hooked up with the good old card father Jack Cohn out in California, and whom I got a chance to meet. He came to one of the Vegas conventions, and he cobbled together a 53 set for me, and Ed had one extra 57 set left from doing his journal research, which I bought, and I got 4 of the sets from a guy in the journal, and then, well, the rest is history and well known. But it was, and I'm thinking, my original, God, I'm going to choke here. My original friendship with Dusty Welsh was after I outbid him on consecutive weekends for full 51 and 52 sets, and nonetheless we became friends, and that's another example. Charlie Fauché both. The outrageously overeducated, high quality human beings that you find in this hobby it's really enough to make you sit back and think. It really is. You know, what are these guys doing slumming with me? I don't know. You know, that's you know, Rebecca's closer to that level than I am. But anyway, that's.
I was wanting to say kind of along the lines of innovation. So, you know, eBay was a great big thing for the collecting, but then, you know, I do remember, Jeff, when we all met in Canton to talk about the football game and the soccer game, and you guys were talking about playing the football game online, and there was all this like clunky stuff that had to be done, because this was what, I don't know, when was that? But it was
2012, was it not?
It's 13.
Okay,
yeah, but it was still a little bit clunky, you know, to get everything set up, to be able to meet with people online and make sure they can see your dice and all that stuff. And then, you know, unfortunately the pandemic has happened, but what we're doing now is something that you guys were doing then. This has made it such that lots and lots and lots of people are now getting together to play face to face on Zoom, right?
Well, you know, and thank you for mentioning that. That was all thanks to the National Card Football League which one of the oldest leagues, probably the oldest league now. I think they started in 1981 in Ohio. Jerry Zajac attended in person, gave us the Skype demo. Again, that's 7 years before, 7 years before the pandemic. And he hooked up a demonstration with Steve Bigfoot Myersberg, and they took part in a global tournament in 2014, again, well before the pandemic. So National Card Football League and its sister American Card Football League. They really innovated. It's actually a great boon for the way you play football. I mean, just entering both your plays, hitting go, and you have everything right there. You mentioned the card father, Jack Cohen. We interviewed him a few years ago, and Richard Prey, of course, wrote a Q&A for us. Do you deal with Richard Prey now still? Just, I mean, how does that kind of work? What can you expect when you're kind of dealing with trying to build these sets up if there's some gaps?
I'm sort of out of that now. My work in terms of building a collection is for all intents and purposes done. So that was my days for that were in the first decade of this millennium, and that's I'm not out there beating the bushes anymore. But I think I think people are doing it a lot of different ways. I think people are making private connections on Delphi. I think people are making private connections through conventions, through all the different ways we can communicate with each other now. Rich Bray, that's a name that's been in this crowd longer than I have. And the great thing about knowing those names is you know who you're dealing with. That's a name that stood the test of time in this hobby. So I think it's only going, the more different avenues we have and the more technology we can make proper use of. Not all use of technology is proper, but we don't need to go there today. It only makes it easier for people, but it makes it easier for sellers too because the market's more efficient. APBA cards were always collectible, but until eBay, there was no efficient market for it. And what you saw when eBay came out was a 10-fold increase in what was available, but you saw a big bump in the prices as well, because the pent-up demand was always there. There was just no supply, and it's going forward well on multiple fronts. So.
Let's just go back a bit to the regional tournaments, because Pete, I mean, John mentioned that you ran the 76 tournament, and those days, I mean, that was 73, 75, 76. You had actually athletes there. It was a broad bunch of presentations. That's come back, right? Just kind of turn, and obviously, John, and Rebecca, you run the Bridesburg. So I'm just kind of curious. You mentioned 2013 is that when. We held the tournament, our football tournament, but Bridesburg kicked off. You kicked off the Bridesburg that summer. Chicagoland really ticked off. Doug Schuyler, and since then you've got. Again, I was just talking to John and Randy Aslan for the This Week in APBA podcast about all the regional tournaments. And of course, Randy Corrier running the newsletter, the official APBA newsletter, details all that wonderfully. I just wonder, and Pete, we've talked about Vegas recently. You and Eric Naftali have been in Vegas. Eric Naftali, the last APBA Journal editor, actually. I just wonder some tips for kicking off and sustaining conventions.
Well, there's a lot of work involved. Certainly, it's not easy. I don't know how it would be today. I think back to the days with Ben Weiser. He was really the organizer, and I assisted him, ran the tournaments, and we showed movies in those days. He had a lot of speakers, different workshops. Today, I guess you just it's in the hands of APBA, and John Herson organizes it, and he sets up a few workshops and some tournaments, soccer, hockey, etc. And then there's the home run derby. There's the main tournament, and he has the Friday night dinner and award ceremony. and it's pretty much a carbon copy of the program every year, which is fine. It's got the same type of thing, but with a different twist, of course. So I think that's where we are today with it.
But Jeff, about the regional tournaments, John and I were talking about this not too long ago. The regional tournaments seem to have exploded after we put on the Henry tournament, and it seemed to demonstrate to people that this was possible, where people didn't really think of it that way. And so there are two people to credit for the first Henry tournament. You were one, and I'll tell you why. And then David Small for just saying, well, we need to do something for these kids. So there was this talk, we need to do something for these kids. And I know that you were at one of the conventions when the kids first came, but it was the thing that we did in Canton that really sparked the idea for me that this is possible and should be pretty simple to do. I had a little bit of a background in putting on large events for politicians in the DC area. And I was like, well, I heard this stuff about doing something for the Brightsburg kids. And I was like, well, we just went to this thing with Jeff, and I don't know why we couldn't do like a version of that for the kids. I mean, it's way simpler than organizing a couple of hundred politicians, for sure. So yeah, I was like, let's just get a room at a hotel and just do this. And knowing that we had just done this with you in Canton, I was like, yeah, this is doable. And once I said it's doable, John was like, okay, well, you do the part that you do, and I'll do the part that I do. And we got it done. And
yep.
Once we demonstrated that it could be done for a reasonable price and pretty simply being, John will tell you it's not simple.
It's simpler than people think.
Right. It's definitely simpler than people think it is. And, when this first idea came up about the Bridesburg tournament, it was talked about in this, like, we need to do this, but it's an insurmountable problem. And so once we got past this idea that this problem is not as big as we would think, it really seems like these tournaments have taken off. People want to do them, and they want to take their own time to put on something simple where they are. And it's been a great thing.
The event, yes, Rebecca, is that's simple, but putting it together is the hard part, and that's where you came in, and I applaud you for that. That's something I would be reluctant to touch, but you were very good at that. And earlier, Jeff, you were asking about how would the APBA people, so to speak, would be together in the future basis compared to how it was in the past. And I think, you go back to the 50s, the way I started out, and a lot of the old timers like Don Proviciero will tell you this too, and probably Roy, that you played with friends in the neighborhood or maybe solo, and then all of a sudden male leagues came along. The APBA Journal was really instrumental in bringing everybody together. And then after the male leagues, you had the conventions, of course. Then you had face-to-face leagues. And now you have these local tournaments, which, as Rebecca said, people realize they can do, and that's good. Although I think they keep a lot of people away from the convention because they can do their own tournaments locally or nearby. And I would think down the road that it's whatever the situation is, it's going to be done all electronically, like John is doing with David Small, and probably in some ways that we can't even think of right now because they haven't been invented yet. But it's going to, there'll be progress just like in every other field.
For sure, for sure.
Cool.
Just I don't want to dwell on the 2013 was obviously a huge year. Again, if you're going to point to Canton, you got to point to Pete Simonelli, because he's the one who inspired any work from this end. And John and Rebecca, without you folks being there, and Bob Tassinari, everyone who came, I keep saying if you folks hadn't shown up, I'd be sitting there eating 25 lunches in a room in Canton, Ohio. And I still thank you, John, for that. You did a fantastic, not only a soccer demo with Jerry Zajac as well, doing some demo there. But you also did a great presentation on Canton. I've got all those. I should repost those maybe on the 10th anniversary of that. And Rebecca, Rebecca's the one who actually took that photo. If you ever see the photo of the group there, so you folks are it. You're it.
The notion of being stuck in a room by yourself in Canton with 25 lunches is, for somebody who spent most of the summers of his childhood, at least a part of it in Canton, because I had family there. Boy, is that frightening. Anyway,
and John Asselon apparently has ties there too.
Oh yeah, John and I have talked about this because John showed up for the convention last year to get put in the Hall of Fame, which was great. I had been on the podcast before, but I'd never gotten to meet him face to face. Just another example of the great people that this hobby seems to regurgitate. I don't know. It's just there's so many great people in this bunch, but John's got ties up there. Guy who won the convention tournament a few years ago, and then was hurt in a car wreck and didn't get back to last year. A guy named Dave Sweely is from Columbus. He's got, we've met him in Canton at times. Ohio's always got more going for it than the comedians say.
Pat comes out.
Patty McGregor is out of Cleveland.
Right, Pat McGregor was there.
That's one of only two people in the inner circle of APBA that we know have owned and have worn kilts. It's just such a great group of people. But Canton, what I remember most of Canton is two friends I made there who have since joined us in the Hall of Fame, and that's Ray and Greg. And I don't know if I've told you this before, but at that first, we were all sitting around the bar the night before the thing started, sitting around the hotel bar, just meeting each other. And Greg was asking me about being in the Hall of Fame, and I said, as great an honor as I'll ever have. Wouldn't mean as much to me as a Nobel Prize in economics, because that's given to you by some committee that reads paper. This was given to me by people that know me and still gave it to me. and Greg nodded along. And then a few years later, he and Ray went to the Hall of Fame. And the year after that, at the convention, Greg came to me. He said, "It wasn't until I got home and finally I understood what you said to me in Canton all those years ago about what it means." And great people, great people. I had we had a lot of fun at that Canton thing. Again, I was revisiting a lot of things because that's only the second time in a 30-year period I'd been there, but since all the family died off. But that was a fantastic event. But yeah, what Rebecca, as far as just to chime in on putting on the regional tournaments, people think the big impediment is cost. But if you just get a meeting room at the local Hampton Inn, there isn't a lot of cost to it. And once you've got the room, and once you put out the word that you're holding the darn thing, the rest. Now again, my thing, the Henry tournament is different because we're dealing with the Boys Club kids, and that does add a complication to it. But if you're just trying to run a tournament, one of the things I have seen, there are some people who there are some, it's common sense stuff, but it's not common sense until you do it once. And one of the things I'm thinking of sitting down and writing up, and I may want to get together with Ken Schultz, who also is, in terms of putting together regional tournaments, is at least as big a name as I. And maybe put down, get a short list of pointers that we can circulate to people, because you see people making what I would call rookie mistakes. Odd numbers of people in divisions. Okay, no. Well, we've got 7 and 7. If we make them even, then this one division only has 6, and the other one has 8. that ain't a problem. Having people sitting there on their hands because you got an even odd number of people in divisions is a problem. That sort of thing, just as an example. Not trying to pick on people, but something I saw in the not too distant past. And I'm thinking maybe Ken and I'll put something like that together in maybe in my voluminous free time. I'll talk.
Right. The how to run a tournament 101.
Yeah, it would be 101. I mean, everybody wants to do their own thing, and I'm not trying to impinge on that. But there's certain things that don't fly, and the regional tournaments would take off even more than they have if people understood some of these things. And some of these are things I was stupid enough to do once upon a time. I'm not brilliant. I've just done it too often. it's experience counts.
Pete, one of the things you mentioned though about the national tournament, the annual tournament, is that every year it's kind of a carbon copy of the prior year. You can pretty much depend on the schedule, except that every year the schedule expands just a little bit, right? It was just a Friday night and a Saturday thing, and then a little bit on Sunday, and now there's like lots of stuff on Friday, and we all kept coming a day earlier to hang out with each other and to just do our thing. And John Herson kept noticing that we kept coming earlier and earlier and earlier, and so he's like, well, why don't I do some programming on some of those other days? And also, and I just want to put a plug in for my own thing.
Now's the time for that, dear.
Right. Coming up for this year's convention. So over the years, especially in Alpharetta, people have started bringing their spouses and their families and other people that don't play. And so, somebody mentioned to me at the end of last year's tournament, while we were waiting for the finals to be played, somebody's spouse came up to me and we were just talking, and she said, it would be really nice if the game company would arrange something for the wives so that we could get to know each other. We could get together and do some sightseeing on Saturday while everybody else is here, but we don't know each other necessarily, and we don't know what to do around here because we're not from here. And my thought was, but I could. And so, yes, on Friday this year, Jen Scoff and I are hosting a social for companions. So anybody who came along with somebody who's not, and they're not going to play on Saturday, and they want to find out what there is to do and maybe hook up with some people that they might otherwise not know to go do those things. We're going to meet in the hotel bar at 4:00. I'll pay for drinks and maybe some snacks if we can get some snacks together, and try to get everybody connected and get some ideas about what to do on Saturday. One of the things that I'm bringing is for people to be able to go to the presidential library. That's one of the many things that can be done in the Atlanta area. But hopefully Pete's wife, will come and help out with some things that she knows in the area. But Jen Scoff has year after year been around the area and done some sightseeing, so she'll have plenty of ideas as well.
I think.
And we know Kathy Blair is going to be there this year. Yeah. She always isn't, but she is this year. So some of the people we have known over the last 10, 20 years will be there. But there are people that I've mentioned before. There are guys whose wives show up and we see them at breakfast. Well, there's something ought to be done here. And what Jen and you are doing here is well thought and admirable. And I'm going to help it by staying as far away from it as I can get.
Yes, you're not invited.
No, I would assume I would not, as long as we're talking about extracurriculars at the convention. And it is just this morning that I got the final sign off from somebody of availability on this. We are resuming for the first time since the Lancaster days. We are resuming having a handbook meeting adjacent to the convention. This will take place on the Wednesday night, 8 o'clock. We're just going to organize it in the lobby. And for the people who don't come that early, some do, some don't, or the people who can't come, there will be Zoom availability. We will have a Zoom hookup. So that the people who can't participate because they're sitting next to me can participate right as we are now. This is all part of an effort to reorganize and kickstart the handbook, which is badly in need. We're not as bad off as we were in 2006, but we're going to be there if the slovenly editor doesn't get up off it and get the troops in proper marching order. So that will take place. That will take place on the Wednesday night at 8 o'clock, and this is the first public announcement of that. I just got the last email I needed from one of the handbook directors who said that the timing was okay. Just got that this morning. So that's
awesome.
So that is yeah, and we are and this coincides with, completely disconnected to it, 3 different APBA people have contacted me in the last 3 months saying, hey, do you need help with getting the handbook moving forward? And to which I said, absolutely, I'll take all the help I can get. So there are brighter days ahead there too.
Awesome. And for those who don't know, we showed the handbook. It's there were 2 print versions. Yes. John announced that in Lancaster that it was going digital, and it is available in all its voluminous, fact-filled glory at zachapahandbook.org.
That's right.
You can also view Scott Lahotsky's Of Dice and Men documentary from the 90s, where you will see Ed Zach on camera and Pete Simonelli, a bunch of the APBA folks and the folks who kicked that project off. It's just one of the most amazing. We talk about you don't even have to play the game; you just kind of look at it sometimes, and to dig into a book like this and the amount of work, it's not even comprehensible. Just the amount of work and all these in just creating the cards and maintaining that. The company and huge kudos obviously to John Herson. I mean, the company, you mentioned the Bill Bordigan era. I mean, there were, the 90s were, although there was some innovation there. I mean, it was a tricky time, it was a transitional time. I mean, the company is stronger than it's ever been. Credit to Herson and everyone who does all these things that, Rebecca, you're doing, everyone does to kind of keep this community going. I wondered if, we talked about last year, everyone contributed to we did a one-off 70th anniversary journal, and I just wondered if, if you might talk about Robert Henry, who, a close friend of yours and to the whole community, and I just wondered if, it's an amazing testament to the long-running friendships in this community, and I just wondered if you would speak to that a bit.
Yeah, he was one of a kind. I certainly miss him. Probably my oldest friend in the APBA community. It's unfortunate that we lost him, and I don't know if there'll ever be anyone else, like him.
Well, in the way I understand it, Pete, the story as I've heard it of Bob Henry, and I met Bob a few times, but I didn't have all the history. But the way I heard it is before the handbook, what we had was Bob.
Yep.
Bob was kind of the keeper of all that history. And until Ed Zach put the handbook together, you had to go to Bob to figure all that stuff out.
Yes, that's right.
As I wrote in that wonderful document that you just showed, it is, if you talk to anthropologists, all societies go through an era as they're developing where they have history, but it's oral history before they develop the ability to write their history down. Well, the APBA crowd is no different. Our oral history period was Bob Henry. And then when we developed the ability to write it down, we had Ed Zach. That's and that's the and you talk about the handbook and its action. You know, I remember what I opened the 2006 New Brunswick meeting with, which is I figured out that this is hard to do, and I figured out it only got done because Zach is really human. He was some superior species. Mm-hmm. But getting back to Bob, Bob was to paraphrase a better wordsmith than I, one of God's own prototypes that was never meant for mass production. But I say that only in a good way. Bob was a wonderful human being. He had as big a heart as there was on earth. He didn't matter if you just crawled up out of the sewer system. If you had an APBA question, or for that matter, a question about any tabletop sports gaming, and you went to Bob, he either had the answer. I suppose he'd get it for you, but I never saw him not have the answer. And he was there with us right until that 2006 New Brunswick meeting. And it wouldn't have been right for him not to be there. Mm-hmm. And we didn't realize at the time that was the last we were going to see it. And it was tragic because he should still be with us. But the cosmos is complicated on these things. When we did the tournament for the adults last year, in lieu of the Henry tournament, we named it after Dusty Welsh, and who was, of course, local to that area and had just passed. And the photograph we used on the coffee mugs we handed out to everybody that was there was a photograph from that 2006 New Brunswick meeting. It's these things, and I remember sitting there, remember he was at the New Brunswick meeting. Pete, too many of them are gone. Dusty's gone, Bob's gone, Beryl's gone.
Don's gone.
Huh?
Don's gone.
Don Adams is gone.
Howard.
It's
Howard.
Howard. Len Gatos.
Those guys weren't at that meeting, but they left us way too early. Charlie Fauché. Charlie Fauché, I didn't realize because he wasn't well when I first met him, that Charlie Fauché was like 4 years younger than I am. Charlie Fauché played high school baseball with Vince Coleman. Charlie wasn't even 60 when he passed.
But it was that 2006 Brunswick meeting where, that kind of, because Bob was at that meeting, it was a great kickstart because he was able to answer a lot of questions then and provide a lot of lore then. But also it was the memory of, we did see Bob at that when Bob didn't show up at the next couple of conventions or the next convention. I don't even remember how many things. Where we kind of went, hey, wait a second.
Bob was always
Bob in 2006, and so where did Bob go?
And the first time it wasn't. Bob was always what I'll politely call a private person, and the notion that we couldn't quite track him down wasn't so disturbing the first time. But after a couple of years, it was like, wait a minute, he's missed 2 conventions, he never misses one. But legitimizing that New Brunswick tournament meeting, the 2 presences there that did that were Bob
and Zach,
and Ed Zach, because Ed gave us the imprimatur to move forward in his name. And some idiot said that's fine, but only if we put his name on the new thing. And somebody insisted upon that and insisted that it not be even voted on. So that was that's. But speaking of the old handbook, the Boswell to Ed Zach's Johnson, Dan Armstrong, heard from him this week. So he's still in touch and blessing our moving forward with handbook stuff at this point. So,
and Dan also came to the New Brunswick meeting.
Yeah, he came to that too. And somehow or another, the guy that organized that deserves a shout here, and that's Rod McLeod, who not only kicked us all in the posterior and made us get together and made Don and I get off dead center on the handbook, but somehow or another talked Ed and Dan into coming in from Oregon for that, and Eric from California. And I'm like, well, that's at that point we had some marching You know, and all the lights were there, and Skeet and Beryl, and you know, everybody who mattered to it showed up for it. Okay, fine, that'll motivate you.
Sure.
But Jeff, also in that article was, you know, the whole, what did we do once we discovered that Bob was missing, and how did we end up making sure that he ended up in a grave of his own that was meaningful, and be able to have a ceremony for those in the community that remembered him, and to be able to do that. And yeah, that's what this community does. And so, yeah, we noticed he was missing. We tried, and we put a lot of effort into Pete. Pete had some inside knowledge to figure out, hey, wait, yeah, what did happen? And so, yeah, that led us to discovering where Bob's remains were, and getting permission from his brother to disinter his remains and to create his own personal place. But the thing about that whole thing that we did, I mean, we were running around Lancaster doing all this together with Pete and Pat and John and I, was when we were purchasing the gravestone.
Oh, this piece of the story.
So we're at the place where you buy gravestones, and we were like, well, what are we going to do about this gravestone? And we knew what we wanted to put on it. And so we go inside, and she says, well, you know, we have this, that, and the other thing. And we're talking to her, and we're like, well, we want something with rounded corners. And then we were like, and we need something like this specific size.
We needed specific dimensions. And
So
then I
then
didn't
we
know
had
what
to
I
call-
couldn't remember what the dimensions were.
We had
So
to
I
call the
did what
game
anybody
company
would
to
do. I
ask.
called up the
That's, yeah.
and now it's not exact. The dimensions aren't exact, because you can only order gravestones to the nearest 2 inches on a dimension.
But we got
I
as
didn't
close
know
as we
that.
could, and we got rounded corners.
But as I correctly pointed out at the time, the only person that we know that would actually measure it and find out that it wasn't exact was the guy we were burying. So that was nobody else.
I think it's pretty accurate. If you look at it, it is obvious.
If you're an
And
APBA player,
they did a good job with the dimensions.
Yeah, it's right on. And at the very bottom in small print, it says that it was placed by his friends in the APBA community. And you're right. He played Strat. He played all sorts of things. But none of them got him out of Pottersfield. We did that. Yeah. If the day comes when I'm called to account for my life, and somebody asks me, what were you involved in that was right? At least I got one answer. At least I got that. Somebody else in the APBA community, a relatively new member of the community, somebody I've gotten to know over the last year was in some serious crisis recently. I won't go into any more detail because I'm trying to protect some confidentiality. But among the things that I sent him to make him feel better, because he's just falling in with the APBA community, I sent him my draft of that story. I said, these are the kind of people you're dealing with here. Just this morning, we found out that what he needed to hear from a third party to make the crisis pass has happened, and he's in much better shape. So that's these are the
and he said he's a believer. When you were like, see, I told you, we had your back and everything was good, he was like, no, you're preaching to the choir now. I'm a believer, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, we take care of our own. People get tired of me repeating it, but it's the defining characteristic of this crowd.
Absolutely. I mentioned the Lancaster 2012. That was the first time. If I hadn't met Pete, I wouldn't have gone. I'd just be too scared, because it's, frankly, I mean, it's weird. If you're an introvert, and you're just kind of, you just don't, it's, the game is one thing, but actually being near people can be a bit anxious. You can get a little anxious sometimes. But if anyone's, I mean, obviously you're close to the convention here, but if there's a convention near you, if you're wondering about getting down to Alpharetta, you're any trepidation or hesitation you might have, you're going to fall in love with these people. so no other way to put that. And again,
for your audience, I'll repeat what I've said for years, and you all will be sick of hearing it because I've repeated it 1,000 times. You show up at the APBA convention, your family. You were always family. You just didn't know it till you showed up. And how many times? Well, I remember one guy that the first Alpharetta convention, I said that to on the Friday, and he looked at me like I'd grown another head. And he came back to me on the Sunday and said, "I get it. I didn't understand you Friday. I get it now." And now he's worked his way all the way into the Hall of Fame. So,
but you also don't.
But
you also don't have to be a player. We had somebody who came to the convention. He was the boys club kid that we talked about. That's now an adult, but he had come a few years ago for his first time, and his dad came with him too. And his dad doesn't play, but guess what? His dad's part of the family, and his dad also came to the Welsh tournament recently.
And he'll probably stop by and see us in August. Yeah,
he comes to say hi. We put him on the list. We, send greetings through his son. And he doesn't play. He's not even interested in baseball at all. And he comes and hangs out and says hi and participates in social things. And he's part of the crowd, and we consider him to be part of the family too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's just, you talk about being intimidated. You're not the first person I've heard say that. I don't know if I should go to the convention, and particularly when reading the Delphi boards or open to that, they get the correct impression that the inner circle of people in APBA are a very tightly knit bunch. Well, that couldn't be more true. But being tightly knit doesn't mean that we're insular. We're anything but. Yeah, it's a very tightly knit group. Well, how do you become part of the tightly knit group? Show up. That's it. That's the way that, nobody's got an ego about where they stand in the community. You're one of us when you just walk in. If you started playing last week, and you're friends with Pete and I and people like Roy Langens and Greg Wells right then.
But on Friday night, John Herson will ask who's there for the first time, who's brand new to the tournament, and that's our opportunity to figure out you're brand new and to go and reach out to you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's you're not going to wander in and everybody ignore you. I know there's some people that might have wished that had happened given what they got, but no, it's absolutely. It is. I'll say it again. The finest group of people I've ever known. The finest group of people I ever hope to know. And again, the game quit being the reason years ago. It's the excuse now. That's how you play the game to get the door open. Once you get the door open, it's all about the people. But that's life.
That's right. Well,
John, would it be proper for me to name two people who became, so to speak, part of the inner circle over the last couple of years? Right? You have, and John, you know them, Frank Fumai, Tom Wilkins.
Tom and his
fit right in.
Oh yeah. Showed up for what? 2018 was the first time, or 2019? I forget which. One of the last.
Maybe 2019. Yeah.
And
no. Yeah, Tom's been there twice.
Yeah, so
the last two,
time,
so 2019 and 2021.
But Tom, showed up, and they're coming in from California.
Oh wow.
No, they were already part of the family before. You already had that done before I met. I mean, that was it. But wouldn't miss them now. And this sort of stuff goes on. This sort of thing just happens all the time. And yet there are relationships that go back half a century. You talk about a relationship between Roy and Skeet and some of the rest of that. I don't go quite that far, but I've 40 plus years on some of these folks. It was 40 years ago that I was running a league. I was way over my head running a league at that age here in Northern Virginia, and Roy was running the Baltimore league. And we had what we will politely call an off the field problem with a guy who was in both leagues. And I wanted to, and Roy didn't know who I was from a sack of spuds, but I called him up. No problem. Exchanged information and a situation that now it wasn't funny at the time, but we tell the story and laugh about it now. And there's just no nobody seems to have any ego about where their spot is, and nobody and if you're remotely interested in the game with a group of people, we want you so bad you may never get away. So that's that's the situation.
Nice. Boy, on that note, I think man, anyone who's watching this, even if you don't play APBA, it's a great game always. And just these folks, even if you're in any tabletop sports sims, obviously now you can even take a little tour. You're going to tour the Atlanta area, and anyone who ever had any, I don't know who might at this point have any issues with the company having moved to Atlanta area, but I mean, it's so much more accessible. I mean, coming from California, it's a breeze.
The people that had problems with it were the Pennsylvania people, and there were a lot of them because the game company was from Lancaster, and a lot of them just had the opposite reaction. Atlanta's a long way to go, and we used to just make a day trip of it. But that was a 10-year-old fight. That was dead and buried. Pete, when was the last time you heard anybody still making that bad noise? 7-8 years ago. Everybody's gotten it right. As long as Delta Airlines is in business, you can get to Atlanta.
And Dale Schreiner runs, right, and Dale Schreiner runs Amtrak actually too, is kind of cool. Dale Schreiner runs the Lancaster tournament as well, so
and there's the one in Lancaster, and again the Henry tournament was a direct outgrowth of the fact that the kids from Philly couldn't go to the Lancaster tournament anymore, and getting a bunch of kids that age to the convention in Atlanta is just one of those you can't get there from here situations. And Rebecca was talking about David Small. David Small and Brian Cavanaugh from the Bridesburg tournament and I were sitting around that last 2012 Lancaster convention, and we knew it was the last one, and everybody was bummed. And Brian Cavanaugh was saying to David and I, of course, I think Brian knew exactly what he was doing too. I think he's like my dogs; he can smell a sucker a mile away. But I say that only with affection. I love Brian to death. But Brian was saying to us, he says, it's a shame the kids love this tournament; they get so much out of it. But it's going to go away. We can't go take them to Georgia. At which point David Small turned to me and said, well, can't we just arrange something separate for them here? And me, being an idiot, shot my mouth off and said, sure we can. I figured we'd do it once. I didn't realize it turned into a life sentence, but that's okay. that's okay. Labor of love.
Well, but we've watched some of those kids grow into adults now. I mean,
the one person we keep talking about, and I don't think it's.
But he's not the only one. We've seen a couple more of those kids turn into adults too.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, but the one we're really talking about, who is bachelors at St. Joe's and all the rest of that. Now he's turned into a very fine young man, and Brian Cavanaugh and the people at the Boys Club and his teachers and his professors and his parents deserve all the credit for that. But everybody involved in the Henry tournament is, in their own mind, taking 0.1% of the credit. We don't deserve it, but we're taking it. So that's, at least we didn't lead them astray. So that's, that's, and as you get older, that sort of thing matters. Believe me, it matters.
Sign up. This tournament and any of the other tournaments, there are many around the country now, from Michigan down to Florida, out to California. We're everywhere. APBA's everywhere. And,
you can even go to a tournament in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, if you really want to go to Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania.
There you go.
And if you do, I suggest you get help. But that's beside me.
And if you don't, if you feel like you just can't, if you, for whatever reason, just start one on your own. I mean, there's a lot of help and a lot of expertise there. And you can play digitally. Bill Lilly is out there in Thailand, and Phil Malloy are out there in Australia, football guys you know, you can do it. And baseball, I imagine as well, you can do. Soccer, I don't know if you can do that as well digitally. I guess
They have been.
Jack Dolan is doing,
Jack is running the convention tournament
and
on Zoom. I'm involved in that. Yeah. Also, he restarted his league based on his EPL draft league, which I'm involved in. Now that doesn't require Zoom. You can do that play by mail, or you can play it Zoom. We're just finishing that season, and I'm having a blast with it. No, soccer works. Soccer, because like baseball, is not a complicated game to play, which is really a function of the fact that soccer is not a complicated sport. That works wonderfly on Zoom. Works okay on play by mail. The seven guys in the league this year stretched from Portsmouth, Mass, to Denver to Calgary.
And the finals are being played at the tournament this year.
Yeah, the final of that soccer tournament, as well as the finals of the hockey tournament, I think will be the Thursday night in Alpharetta. And by some awful twist of fate, I'm in the semifinals of the soccer tournament. So I have a chance to maybe actually win something for once, and which will probably cause the universe to end.
Who's your team? Who's your team?
I'm playing 2019, 2020 Bayern Munich at the tournament. Yeah, which is a powerhouse. It's a killer. That team won the treble, German Cup, German League, Champions League, plus their number one striker, Lewandowski, happens to bear the same last name as Rebecca's mother did at birth. So that's there's Lewandowski in that part of Poland is like Smith in England. It's a very, very common name. But yeah. And then in the draft league, that we draft off of certain EPL teams. And I'm looking for a better year next year. The fact that my number one guy is Mohamed Salah doesn't hurt. It's not at all. So we'll go from there. Soccer works great on that. Hockey works well on it. Steve Scoff used to. Now Chuck Source is doing it. Steve Scoff ran that hockey tournament for years. I know they do Zoom work on that. It's absolutely, and that's a much more complicated game than soccer, just because the sport is much more complicated. All works fantastic. All works great.
Pete, what team or teams you bringing down to Atlanta this year, Alpharetta?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe I should keep it a secret.
Oh, there you go. Sure, you can.
It'll only be a baseball team.
Okay, all right.
I pretty much made up my mind. It's possible I might change it, but we'll see.
Oh my goodness. Ooh. And Rebecca,
I haven't decided on a team yet. I think I might go back to one of my favorite Cubs teams. We'll see.
Everyone, safe travels. Have a ball. Folks, you're going to be, if you haven't been to the tournament yet, you're going to meet these wonderful people. Have a great time. Thank you so much. I hope we can do this again at some point. People. Okay. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you, Jeff. All the best to you.
Thanks, buddy. Good to see you as always.
Great to see you. Thank you.